magic bullet would be, those are all downstream effects of insulin resistance. The weight loss plateau is the single most common problem.
Talk about insulin resistance so much, and I want to give a clear grasp on what it is specifically. So how would you define it for anyone to truly understand what it is?
Insulin is released when you eat food to bring the blood sugar levels down. Well, by bringing it down, the only way it can do that, and down means out of the blood, is into the body, into the cells. Insulin is the primary storage hormone. Blood sugar regulation is just a byproduct of being able to store glucose, but it's still responsible for storing protein and fat tissue. So insulin is the most potent storage hormone.
What do you do for the ones where we cannot necessarily get them to get as active as we would like?
Yeah, I think the good news is, if we're talking about the plateaus, it's not.
What is causing people to not see the types of successes that they want, or what types of roadblocks are they hitting?
This is important to discuss because.
So I've known you a long time, and both you and I have been in health, fitness, various aspects of it for our entire lives. I remember working at my mom's gym when I was 15 years old, and we've seen pretty much everything out there, from Benjamin, Fen back in the day, to all of our buddies working for Herbalife and Advocare and every supplement company you can imagine. And we have a pretty good idea of what types of results to expect, both high and low, on either end of the spectrum. But these GLP-1s, there's been nothing like this before, ever. And it's astounding, it's blowing my mind. But there's a lot of misconceptions, there's a lot of confusing information, a lot of conflicting information. And it seems like the one thing people are truly missing right now is just direction. Like, is this stuff safe? Can I use it indefinitely? Should I? How much? There's so much getting into this. So let's just start with GLP-1s as a whole. Why the hell are these things opening the door in such more exciting ways than anything we've had in the past?
Yeah, I think when we look at, people are quick to say obesity, but this goes so much more than obesity. I want to take a step back beyond, like behind, before obesity. Many conditions have the same issues that we're about to talk about: obesity, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, PCOS, menopause, other inflammatory conditions. They all have the same issue with difficulty and weight loss. Specifically, it's usually not so much the weight loss, but it's the, and I call it weight maintenance resistance. It's like there's a resistance in the body of individuals that possess these various diseases. That's why it's so much more than just obesity, where it's like there's this weight set point, and the body is doing everything it can, and it's fighting tooth and nail to get the person to essentially lose the results, right? Regain the weight. And that gets into a whole nother conversation, the science behind why it's happening. Basically, long story short, manipulation of an individual's metabolism, the amount of calories they burn at rest, and their intrinsic hunger. It's very powerful. Brings the body back. So the human body has powerful defense mechanisms, and it gets much worse when you have these various conditions, this weight maintenance resistance. And so we've never had help like this. We've never had something that shatters through that barrier better than these medications, because, right, what is the root cause of all those conditions? And I'm certainly not a scientist that can give you the root cause. I'm giving you more my perspective of helping people over 20 years. And so in my professional opinion, I think one of the main root causes, what I feel comfortable saying, is insulin resistance. I think inflammation is right up there, and probably second place. And then you could look at genetics and environmental factors and toxicity and all that. But I really think if we had to focus on one thing, that would, if we focus on one thing, would have the most positive impact on all those different conditions, it's part and parcel insulin resistance. And we have never had anything that actually gives instantaneous improvement in insulin resistance. Like, so immediately you take this medication, within a short period of time, you become insulin sensitive.
Let me interrupt you. I'm so sorry.
Please.
Because we dance around this a lot, and explain it to me as if I were a freshman in high school. Okay, we talk about insulin resistance so much, and I want to give a clear grasp on what it is specifically. So how would you define it for anyone to truly understand what it is?
Yeah. So we'll separate the why, because that's usually, the what is it. So in order to understand what insulin resistance is, you really need to understand what insulin does, right? we think of it as the blood sugar, right? The blood sugar hormone, right? It keeps my blood sugar in check, right? I want to release it. So insulin is released when you eat food to bring the blood sugar levels down. Well, by bringing it down, the only way it can do that, and down means out of the blood, is into the body, into the cells. And so, but what people don't realize is that insulin does so much more than just store sugar. It's the reason why we store amino acids, which is the building blocks of protein. It's the reason why we store fat tissue to where fat gets stored in adipose tissue or visceral around the organs. And so insulin is the primary storage hormone. Blood sugar regulation is just a byproduct of being able to store glucose, but it's still responsible for storing protein and fat tissue. I mean, look, bodybuilders wouldn't risk their life injecting insulin if it wasn't a primary driver of the massive muscle growth that they're able to get beyond the years of Arnold Schwarzenegger era, where it was just anabolic, androgenic substances. Now they have insulin-like growth factors, and that's what we're talking about. So insulin is the most potent storage hormone. But that's all fine and dandy. We want a powerful hormone that gets released when we eat, because when we eat, our blood sugar rises. We call this a transient rise. Insulin gets the job done, brings the blood sugar back down, then insulin levels lower. So it should be a short-term transient thing. Insulin resistance is merely, and this is a situation where the name actually does define it. You know what I mean? Like PCOS, what the hell is that? That doesn't tell me anything, right? Polycystic ovarian syndrome, okay. But insulin resistance actually is a good name because it's clearly defining what's happening. Your body has developed a resistance to insulin. Now, it's not a full-blown resistance because your body can eventually still get the job done, but it has to get the job done via releasing more insulin. So let's just say, for the sake of simplicity, it took your body 10 units of insulin to move 100 grams of sugar out of your blood into your body. Well, now it takes 20 units, then it takes 30 units, then it takes 40 units to get the same amount of sugar out of your blood into your body. That's what resistance means. Keeping it super simple. Now, the why, the mechanisms that we can go on and save that for another show, but that's what insulin resistance is. And so the reason why this is so detrimental is because of that right there. The process of getting the job done means sacrificing having more insulin release.
Snowballing.
It's snowballing, and this is a medical condition known as hyperinsulinemia, but in other words, chronically elevated insulin levels. And so that's why the hallmark diagnostic test, unfortunately, most practitioners don't check this, would be a fasted insulin and C-peptide. Because if you're fasted, like we talked about earlier, transient rises, you shouldn't have rises in your insulin. Your insulin should be low,
right?
But if you check it and you haven't eaten for 8 hours and that thing is not even super high yet, if it's just medium or closer to that upper end of the reference range, that's problematic. And then when it gets even higher, that's even more problematic. So because something's wrong with your body. And look, insulin resistance isn't the only cause, but insulin resistance is the primary cause of why somebody would have elevated insulin levels if they haven't eaten.
Okay.
Or if they don't have like a cortisol issue, because that can cause it as well.
And to give them something they can take home and take action on right now. So you have A1C, and that's roughly 90-day average, right? Then you have
of your blood sugar.
Okay, blood glucose, which is in the moment, transient rises and falls. But fasted blood glucose levels or fasted insulin levels, they start to elevate, what is it, up to 3 years prior to A1C elevating?
3 to 5, 3 to 6.
Okay,
yeah,
6
it's an early battle, and it's so crazy. But yeah, the moment you become pre-diabetic, you've been losing the battle for the past 3 to 6
So
years.
for those at home who are worried about diabetes, family history, maybe just poor lifestyle, you would recommend that test before even looking at A1C?
100%, because A1C doesn't start to rise until you losing the battle.
Right.
Think about that. Your entire time. So I want to be clear. Losing the battle means just that, losing the battle. Winning the battle means your blood sugars are under control without even having to keep high insulin levels, right?
Yeah.
So optimal health means low insulin levels. So for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, sometimes people their whole life, because they can stay insulin sensitive their whole life. You're eating whatever you're eating, however you're eating, and your body just keeps transient rises, goes back down. That's a lot of people don't have that right nowadays, but for people, let's just say in theory, that would be the gold standard. So however many years you have that, the moment you start losing the battle, that 3 to 6 year process is the moment that if you happen to test it and catch it, you would start to see, my fasted insulin levels are just starting to rise. And it's a 3 to 6 year process. Glucose looks great. Fasting glucose looks great. A1C looks great, but insulin's slowly creeping up. And, genetics and many other things are affecting that. But that's the losing the battle part.
Mhm.
This is the ideal. So
Okay, and then last point, once you're insulin resistant, so your body isn't responding to the insulin that you're producing. So the answer to that is for your body to produce more to cause an effect, which only furthers the actual insulin resistance.
well, yeah, because then, and this gets really, really in depth, but now you're talking about the why. The
Mm-hmm.
why does an individual develop resistance to begin with? And there's many theories, and I think this one is the most controversial one because I saw a paper talking about high saturated fat.
Yeah.
So I think, and again, I'm not a scientist,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm gonna play the role of saying that I think there's many causes and that we probably still don't even know yet, but I do truthfully believe chronically elevated insulin levels are and probably the most contributing factor to the development of resistance, toxicity, genetics, all those things can cause an individual to get resistant too. So that's where it gets really confusing because you're like, wait a minute, it's the elevated insulin levels that cause the resistance, but then the resistance caused the elevated. Well, at some point, something had to enter into that spiral.
Right.
And that only thing that can enter you into the lifestyle, meaning, in other words, the only thing that can create elevated insulin levels, if you're not resistant, would be eating junk food all the time. Now, not the only thing, again, there are other cases. So outside of the other cases that would cause insulin being raised, in most cases, this is a lifestyle issue. This is a lifestyle habit where you're eating constant carbs all the time, processed carbohydrates, not getting good exercise, you're not resistance training. So you're doing all the things that would, you're not doing all the things or you're doing all the wrong things that contribute to that elevated insulin, which eventually over time, paired with poor health, inflammation, stress, hits a point where you finally start to develop that resistance. And that's when the slippery slope really sets in like a hamster wheel and it becomes more challenging. It's so much easier for someone to fix the issue of being overweight and elevated insulin levels if they're not resistant. It's like easy. Just stop eating the crap that you're eating. Stop eating the carbs. But
Mm-hmm.
now once you become resistant, now you have this additional layer that even when you're not eating, you still have the problem. And that's where it gets really, really challenging. That's why the GLPs are just a big deal.
Thank you for allowing that quick divergence. That was gold for anyone listening. So back to now the astounding GLP successes that we've been seeing recently and the differences between what we have now and what we had in the past. Moving forward, what is causing people to not see the types of successes that they want, or what types of roadblocks are they hitting?
Yeah, and this is important to discuss
Mm-hmm.
because this is the most amazing, class of medications we've seen. Many people call it miracle. I'm one of those people. I think this is a miracle. I think this is the magic
Yeah.
bullet. Now, but by definition, the magic bullet, if I really was just taking away my perspective of what reality magic bullet is, and I just said magic bullet, the magic bullet would be, and I don't think this is ever going to happen, but it would be a medication that has zero risk,
Mm-hmm.
that instantaneously makes an individual insulin sensitive, reduces their inflammation, has a permanent effect, has no downside, and when they stop, it's a lifelong effect. That would be the miracle perfect solution. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Who knows in 100 years with the advancements of science, though, I'm sure they would say the same thing about many things that we have today 100 years ago. So who knows? But with all that being said, now we kind of put our goggles of reality and go, okay, this is far from that. But compared to this is the closest we've ever gotten to that. Absolutely. Think about the biggest classes of medications we have right now: cholesterol, blood pressure, diabetes, just
Mm-hmm.
those three for a second. What do they all address? They address very important symptoms that can kill an individual if you don't get them under control: blood
Mm-hmm.
sugar, blood pressure, cholesterol, right? But those are all downstream effects of insulin resistance. I've always said this since these medications came out. Just imagine if your physicians prescribed you GLP-1 medications at that early onset. Like, remember when you talked about losing the battle for 3 to 6 years?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in there, if they before, because in that stage, I can almost guarantee you, most individuals in that early stage of 3 to 6 years of starting to lose the battle, they didn't have the cholesterol issues, they didn't have the blood pressure
Their
issues.
A1C is fine at
Their
this point.
A1C is fine. So a little small GLP dose would have completely done the problem. We'd probably put big pharmaceutical companies out of business. So, anyways, I just really want to get that point across, that closest thing to the miracle that we've ever had. But like anything, since they're not the miracle, what are some of the downsides? What are some of the problems? And I think there's many things we could talk about. The contraindications, I think we've talked a lot about that. I want to focus on because the contraindications are more just of like, okay, who doesn't qualify for the medication? Family history of thyroid cancer, acute pancreatitis, gallbladder issues. Okay, fine. Those are, you shouldn't do the medications. And that's a discussion for you and your licensed healthcare practitioner. But what are the problems people are running into? And, hands down, it is the stall. The weight loss plateau is the single most common problem. And I know this from not only the thousands of people that are in my coaching programs, but I go live on social medias, platforms, TikTok, and we're talking to hundreds of people. And that's the number one question they ask me is, I'm in a stall, I'm in a stall, I'm in a stall. My doctor told me to increase the dose. And now I'm getting hammered by symptoms, or I was losing weight and now they told me to increase the dose. So this is the biggest question. And, spoiler alert, increasing your dose should be the last thing that you do to fix a stall. It's one thing if you were never losing weight to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk more about this in a little bit because I think we need to dig into the science of a weight loss stall more, and then we can come back to this conversation. But it's one thing if you've never lost. Some doctors and physicians, yeah, I would agree. Increase the dose at the comfortable rate till we start weight loss. But what we're talking about is people who were losing weight at, say, 2.5 milligrams tirzepatide, and now they're no longer losing weight. And many of these people are being told, or 5 milligrams, and many people are being told by their physicians, by their obesity specialists, let's increase. And this is ignoring the underlying problem.
Mm-hmm.
The underlying problem wasn't the need for more medication. The underlying problem was metabolic downregulation. And this opens up the door for the conversation about what is a weight loss plateau. So I think we should get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the weight loss plateau, and this is, it doesn't matter whether you're on GLP-1s or not. And that's the thing. Like we're talking about GLP-1s because GLP-1s cause massive deficits in what you're eating, but this can happen from anybody, regardless of whether you're on the meds. So a weight loss plateau is a situation where we have metabolic down regulation, meaning your body actually turns down the metabolism. So we've all heard of this condition called hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism. Hypothyroidism is a legitimate medical condition that requires medication in many cases because of how important the thyroid hormone is. The thyroid hormone, every single cell in our body has receptors for thyroid. Think about that. Trillions of cells. Thyroid is responsible for activating the mitochondria, which are the powerhouse in our cells, which convert the substrates of what we eat into the energy that we need to survive. So this is a big deal, right? That's why the laundry list of symptoms of hypothyroidism affect your quality of life. Even testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, as amazing as they are, will be secondary to thyroid. If you have an underactive thyroid, you got to get that managed first. This is literally a short-term medical grade hypothyroid situation. And that, I don't think people don't understand that. If you measure someone's blood work, you would see in this situation lower levels of free fraction T3. You would see lower levels of thyroid hormone. And symptomatically, you don't even need blood work because I talk to these people all the time. And so if you're watching this, the symptoms that you begin to develop when this downregulation happens. So take yourself back, listeners, to when you first started losing weight and you started stalling. I see the big four. Out of all the hypothyroid symptoms, there's four that seem to pop out quickly. Decreases in energy level, increases in brain fog, increases in coldness, intolerance to cold, and constipation. There's a few more, but those are the big four. And it's like clockwork. Everybody that on my lives all the time or my coach be like, yes, that's, and I told my doctor about it. And there's no, like, that's the part that really gets me going, is that there doesn't seem to be acknowledgement of what that problem is from the medical establishment and the simple solution, which we're going to get into in a second. So this caloric deficit, right? It's crazy because you have to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight. So it's kind of a catch-22. You can't avoid this per se. You can, I think, and we'll talk about that. But yes, a caloric deficit is necessary for weight loss. But a caloric deficit over a long enough period of time is what triggers this primal instinctive reaction from your body. It's survival mode, right? Think about ancestral times. I mean, 3 million of years, our ancestors had to go through very long periods of times where they didn't have food. And everybody alive today is the result of millions of years of our ancestors that did survive. And the way that they did survive was developing mechanisms within their body to be able to survive periods of famine, starvation. And so as much as this mechanism works against us right now, It's what kept our ancestors alive. So you can thank your ancestors for this problem. But yes, our ability to slow down the metabolism in anticipation for finally, famine's over, it's a great thing back in the day. So that's what we're literally talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So we understand what it is. We understand sort of what's causing it, and medically speaking, what's actually happening. It's a short-term hypothyroid situation. So then some people ask, should I take medications? No, I don't think you should take medications because this is a very short-term situation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm a big fan of people, maybe they have hypothyroidism for other issues like inflammation and it takes a year or two to fix it. Okay, fine. Get on the thyroid short-term, check your levels, see if you can get off later.
Mm-hmm.
That's something different because we're talking 1 to 2 years. But this is very correctable, 3 to 5 weeks. Like you just need to do the opposite. And so people are like, what's the opposite? And I always like to joke around with people all my lives. I go, well, what do you guys think? What's the opposite of eating less over time? They're like, eating more? It's like, yeah, ding, ding, ding. It's all you had to do.
Mm-hmm.
So literally, you create the opposite signal to your body, and the opposite signal is a caloric surplus over time. Now, it gets tricky because if you start eating too fast, you will put yourself in too big of a caloric surplus
Mm-hmm.
and create weight gain. And you talk to it, and this is where it gets tough because you talk to an individual. Think about it. Think about the psychology of a person that's finally lost weight with the meds, without, they're stuck, they're exercising more, they're eating less, they're freaked out about regaining the weight. That's the big one. They're freaked out, and now you're telling them to eat more. You can see why there's some hesitancy.
I mean, if we were 2 hours on our way to Vegas and you had to turn around to grab your wallet at home, I wouldn't be too happy either, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because you're like, wait a minute, you want me to do the opposite of what yeah. So this is where you got to trust in the process. So you can't eat too much too fast. And so what I found, and this is 20 years of doing this, 10 years of myself and 20 years with patients, 2 to 300 calories at a week seems to be the magic spot. So one day you just say, okay, great, I'm going to start this. And Lane Norton talks a lot about this. A lot of people, he calls it the reverse diet. I call it a reset,
Mm-hmm.
a metabolic reset. You establish how many calories you're eating. And then, so let's say you're like, okay, great, because a lot of people aren't counting. So you got to start counting for a couple of days, figure out, okay, wow, I've been averaging 1,200, 1,400. So let's just say for the sake of it, 1,200, because I see that a lot. I see crazy low numbers because of GLP-1s. Now we get into the dark side. Before GLP-1s, you didn't catch people eating 1,200. Like you didn't. It was really difficult to eat 1,200. I mean, you'd have to have some crazy mental toughness to adhere to a 1,200 calorie diet. Now it's really easy. I see people coming in sometimes at 1,000 or 9, and they're like, I feel fine. I can't eat more. That's a little bit of the problem here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just say 1,200. So now we say, okay, this week I want you to shoot for 1,500, 300 increase. You do that for a week. Then next week, 1,800. Then next week, 2,100. So what we're trying to ultimately get to is a number close to what's called a TEE, which is total energy expenditure. The amount of calories a body is supposed to be burning, given all factors included, including exercise activity levels. And the TEE is mostly 60-70% your basal metabolic rate. That's how many calories you would burn if you didn't move for 24-hour periods, if you just stood still. And then 30 to 40% is everything else, your actual exercise and the stuff that you do just day to day. The majority of your metabolism is actually just basal. And that's the part that can be influenced by hormones. So that's how the program works. And what you're doing week by week is you're paying attention. This is so important, right? Because most people it's smooth, but for some people it's not. And that's why I have coaching programs. But if everything's going smoothly, number one, you'll notice week 1, week 2, you're not gaining weight. In fact, about 20% of people will actually start to lose weight, which is crazy because they're like, wait a minute. I'm losing weight right now, right? It's only about 20%. I would say 70%, 75% of people are going to maintain weight.
Mm-hmm.
And then every now and then you have 5 or 10% of people that start gaining weight.
Would you say the 20% is more or less the individual's newly sparked thermogenesis?
Yeah, exactly what it is, because essentially we're playing a game here, right? We have this energy balance because calories do matter, folks. It's just hormones are senior to that. But you're playing a game of energy balance.
Mm-hmm.
So if the individual eating more and their body speeds up faster than the rate that they're speeding their, because we don't know how fast your metabolism is speeding up. We're guessing here. 300 to a week is total arbitrary guess by my observation. I did not read that in medical literature. I've after 20 years of doing this, I found that to be a great number. But your metabolism might speed up faster than that rate and you'll see weight loss. For the people that the 5-10% who start gaining weight, all that means is the opposite. Your metabolism is just not speeding up at the rate at which you're increasing. Now, mind you, you could have the problem of somebody who thinks they're eating only 200, 300 more, and their numbers are way off. And I find that to be the more common problem. So you have to consider the just the difficulty with counting calories as it is as a whole, which is why I don't make people do it for any longer than usually a reset, and that's it. So that's what we're looking at week by week. And then we can also confirm symptomatic improvement. I mean, within a week or two, I'm like, I feel more energetic. Like, I don't feel as brain foggy. I don't feel as tired. Like, holy crap. Like, I was really struggling and I'm pooping more often. I'm less constipated. I feel more warm. And you know what's so crazy? I've talked about this a lot last couple months. I say we have this going back to GLP-1s because it relates to this. I'd make this joke that we're in a situation where there's going to be a lot of zombies walking around. There's already a lot of zombies walking around. We'll give it 1 or 2 more years as the amount of people get their hands and try a cycle of GLP-1 medications. We have problems of zombies. You know, what do zombies look? They're brain foggy. They're tired. They're not, but they're skinny. You know, and you know what's so crazy is on first glance, even if you ask them, they probably I feel great. But if you sit down with them and go, okay, let's remove the excitement of you being happy and joyful about your weight loss, and now tell me, how do you really feel? Okay, we push the psychological effect of just being happy that you're losing weight, and you go, oh wow, actually I am more tired. Now that I think about it, I am more brain foggy, you know. And so, anyways, the opposite happening, the improvement in those side effects is what we expect to happen. And it's like clockwork. It's like clockwork. You don't need to put these people on thyroid medications. In small cases, we find out, oh, this person actually does have a medical grade hypothyroid situation because we do very thorough blood work. So
let me tell you this really quick. I'm going to do something that I've never done before. Pull out my cell phone on a podcast. An old coworker of mine, high functioning individual. He owns a corrective exercise gym on the West Coast, and we did his labs a while back. Finally, I'm sorry, I sent him his labs a while back. He finally got him done, and his thyroid, his free T3 was 2.1. I'll call him J.
2.1?
2.1. So we took care of him, and he texted me this morning after taking the medication for the first time last night. Got the pep in my step back. Glad I had the wherewithal to start 5 micrograms today. Barely even need the caffeine. Better already. And that just goes to show you, when you mention the thyroid being the master control center and being more important than even testosterone and estrogen, here's a guy who I thought was healthy as can be, but he was sluggish. He had the symptoms, and right away he feels better and doesn't need his coffee anymore. I mean, I couldn't really imagine not having my coffee tomorrow morning eventually, right? So that really, really goes to show how, if you're not balancing some aspect of your health, nothing else is really going to matter that much.
Hey guys, I wanted to interrupt for a quick minute. I have a free guide for you to get you towards GLP-1 independence. This is phenomenal. If you've already started or you're thinking about started, I break down step by step exactly what you need to do to graduate towards GLP-1 medication independence. I'll link to it in the show notes. We'll see you guys back in the show.
No, and you know, to the point as well. I'm a big fan of bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, sex hormones, thyroid, and I'm quick to say if we need the hormones, give it to the individual. But this is actually one of the few situations where we can get a powerful improvement in an individual's hormones naturally. Very few times can you get the needle to move that fast. But in this situation, you can, because this is a short-term defense mechanism. Your body is just downregulating because it thinks it's starving. It thinks there's a problem. Fix the problem in this case, which is just a calorie thing, and it comes out of it. Now, genetics and toxic exposure or other issues causing the hypothyroid, you might find that out if the individual's thyroid doesn't get better. And that's why we're fans of medicating, but always like fix this first. So, okay. So now we understand what it is, right? What caused it. GLP-1s just happen to be the massive caloric deficit producing medication, which is why we're seeing a hell of a lot more zombies walking around. We know how to fix it. So then usually people, this is the ones that are really paying attention to me, is, well, Dr. Jones, when I go back to my weight loss, isn't this going to happen again? Now they're thinking. And I love that. And the answer is, yeah, probably. It sucks, right? Oh my gosh. But here's the thing. So I want to be clear. What I'm essentially saying is a macronutrient deficiency over time, caloric deficit. There are other causes. I was doing a podcast with Dr. Dan the Wizard, and we were talking about the other, the micronutrient deficiencies. So there are other causes. I just want to be clear on that. But the calorie is the big one. The calorie one is the one that we, are running into most of the time. So now we kind of get into, well, what's the best way to go about losing weight from a calorie perspective? There's a ton of things you need to do, and we've made so many other videos talking about like balancing. How do we lower insulin levels? Like, hopefully from even this episode, people are like, okay, great, that makes like insulin resistance, like that's a problem. Hyperinsulinemia, like it's a driving factor behind this. So we know we got to lower insulin levels, but from an energy perspective, we have to consider that too as well. I'm a huge fan of fasting, and I created the Flow protocol, which is FLOA, fasting like our ancestors, and it's the world's most aggressive and structured approach towards prolonged fasting. So we get our patients from short-term intermittent fasting, which is every day, into longer rounds of fasting. The goal being somewhere between 36 to 48 hours every single week. That is such a massive caloric restriction. In fact, that's about as massive as you can get, because fasting by definition is the most aggressive caloric deficit. So this always gets a little bit of like, okay, well, if that's more aggressive, you said earlier, more aggressive caloric restriction, isn't that what causes downregulation? And again, now we're thinking, how do we make sense of that? There's a threshold. If we're looking at the most aggressive caloric restriction, like something like fasting or eating just a couple hundred calories a day, it takes a much shorter period of time to hit a threshold for an individual of now the body reacts. If we're talking about a small caloric deficit, 200 to 400 calories, it's going to take much longer for the body to have the same type of reaction, but the body's going to have the same type of reaction. So those are the differences between the two sorts of energy deficits. Now, the factor to remind everybody is everybody's own individual genetics and environment are going to determine why some person could starve off 100 pounds and another person barely loses 10 pounds and they plateau. Total tons of unknown there. And I think most of that's insulin, again, driven. But for the sake of the conversation, what we can control is the energy part. And so for a fast, and this is supported by data, about usually 4 days, 3 to 4 days to 5 days is when most humans, if they're completely fasted, will start to downregulate. So you just avoid that. So what I figured out is 2 days is very, very far away from 3, 4, 5. And it's still massive because we're talking 2 out of 7 days. You're not eating anything or very low amount of 10 to 20 to 30, 40 calories, your fish oil, maybe a splash of nut pods creamer because it's just fat. So very, very, very close to zero. And, for average person burning about 2,000 calories a day, that's 14,000 calories for the week. We just took out 4,000. That's over a pound of body fat, because a pound of body fat is 3,500 calories. So that's massive. So the rest of the week, now here's the kicker. We just gave our body this massive reaction by not eating, this massive stressor by not eating for 2 whole days, burned a ton of fat, made our body more insulin sensitive, reduced inflammations, all those benefits we know of fasting. Now here's the kicker. The instructions for our patients the next 5 days are to get into a high energy input. That's the key. You have to do it. And even if you shoot over your TE, even better. Don't worry about being a couple hundred calories over on those days. You just had a 4,000 calorie deficit. You have plenty of wiggle room.
Right.
So it's a lot harder to overeat, than you might realize, especially when you're taking low dose or moderate dose of these GLP-1s. So that's sort of in my opinion, again, not backed off by the data, but why, having done, for this style for probably the last 10 years. And when we ran gyms back in the day, and we didn't know about this stuff. And so it was all about calories in versus calories out, small caloric daily deficit, 200 to 500 daily caloric deficit. So watching thousands of people in that mode versus thousands of people in this mode, very, very different. We had a lot more plateaus happen to people in this situation than we do here. You can still plateau here, but if it happens, it's because you let yourself undereat on those 5 days. So that's where the coaching comes into play. And, that kind of, and I'm curious what you think too, but that kind of brings me back to the original problem we started talking about, which is you're getting these medications from primary care physicians, med spas, even obesity specialists, which I'm not here to say I know more than an obesity specialist. I'm not a board certified medical doctor, but I certainly know this topic better than most of them. And I'll put my, face to face and have a conversation with any of them. But it's just, and I used to get so frustrated with doctors younger in my career. And then as I advanced and, became more wise and privy to the bigger situation, it's, these doctors are being forced to see people in such a short period of time. They barely have enough time to make sure the patient doesn't OD from taking the wrong dose. That's all they have time for. They don't have time to coach, to teach, to educate.
The first clinic my mom worked at in Honolulu, she left that clinic mainly because they had her doing rotations of 4 patients in an hour. So she had 15 minutes for bedside manner, review the chart, go over all the diagnostics, go over everything about the patient, and then try to write a prescription and figure out. So you have no time literally to say, hey, by the way, take this action, make this lifestyle adjustment, get better sleep, eat whole food, none of that. And from a farmer perspective, that's perfect. Just enough time to write the prescription.
Oh yeah, I mean, uh, is it all by design? I don't know. I mean, I think it is, but I mean, I'm not gonna chase that down right now and make claims that I can't
Yeah.
substantiate. And why I'm not like I'm gonna be able to stop that as an individual. But we got to work within the system.
Mm-hmm.
And so that to me is the biggest problem with these GLP-1s is that people are out there, and this is the zombie situation. They don't have the guidance, they don't have the protocol, they don't know what to do, or they're still being told very. And then when they are lucky enough to say have a clinic that does have a nutritionist or a registered dietitian, the information they're giving them is so outdated.
Yeah.
Carbohydrates are fine. Incorporate them into your diet. Just have a nice, healthy, well-balanced diet. Nothing's wrong with carbohydrates. It's like, are you freaking kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely not saying we need to be ketogenic diet for life, although that would be amazing if you could adhere to it, but most people can't. I can't adhere to a ketogenic diet long term, so I don't do that. But using ketogenic and the possibility of getting into that low carb ketogenic state as a tool for a couple months to jumpstart an individual's ability to become insulin sensitive again, paired with the fasting, with the weight training, all the different pieces, and fueled by, meaning the barrier to even do these things given and bestowed to us because the GLP-1s are so amazing. And that's why these things are still necessary tools.
Mm-hmm.
We have other powerful fat mobilizing peptides like AOD and Samorelin, Tesamorelin. The combo of mobilization of fat and what a GLP does, which is suppress the food chatter, allows an individual to jump into head first the format, but you still need the format. And that's where people they're not getting it, or if they're lucky to have something, I think in most cases it's the wrong information
or minimal.
Yeah, and I'll say this, like, I'm not here at all to say I'm the only one that knows it. In fact, a lot of functional practitioners will tell you exactly what I'm telling you. So here's the thing. Yep, you have the medical where you're not getting any coaching, or you have the medical where you are getting coaching, but it's very allopathic based, registered dietitian, and look how good that's done us. Then you have the whole functional side where what I'm teaching is mostly functional with a couple tweaks on the fasting. I think that's what differentiates me, some really long fasting. But then the majority of the functional side will tell you to stay away from the medications. I just got into a little bit of a discussion on my live today with a very passionate functional doctor, who was just spewing misinformation. And so it's like, where's the middle ground? I think the middle ground, and this is where I'm like, if there's anybody that thinks like-minded like me, who embraces the functional perspectives, but still embodies and allows science, because we recognize, me and my medical practitioners recognize that, man, people are screwed up. People, and it's not their fault. This is a disease that's been driven by, I think, a lot of toxicity, a lot of genetics, and yeah, poor lifestyle, of course, like toughen up, but it's hard to toughen up, I think, in today's day of ages with the amount of toxic crap and stress.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the damn presidential debate. I'm not even going to go there, but how can you not be stressed about choosing between one of those two?
Yeah.
I don't even know. So a lot's going on, and I think that we need help. And so, anyways,
Okay.
a little bit of a tangent.
So here's a challenge. Second part is going to be a question I know a lot of people are going to have bouncing around. But first, believe it or not, I don't think I've ever asked you this before. Not at least like this. We know that with any side effect from medication, any toxin, any contaminant. You're dealing with two factors. You're dealing with the dose and you're dealing with the duration, right? So we understand that some of these GLP-1s, especially with the incredibly high dose, especially with some conditions already, can cause like acute pancreatitis. Okay. How is it then that we are generally recommending this already this early to be safe for lifetime use? When again, if it's not dose, if I'm not drinking 20 gallons of vodka today, but I'm drinking beer every day for the next 20 years, that's just as bad. And so, how is lifetime use of this GLP being so heavily recommended, even though we don't know what the long-term consequences are yet?
Yeah. I think that's a doozy right there. There's so many angles to approach that question. I think the quick answer is because it appears so far that the pros outweigh the cons, and truthfully, that is the basis of medicine,
Mm-hmm.
right? But obviously, we got to unravel so much more than just that. That's the same argument for the COVID vaccine. And I'm just going to leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to leave it there. But that was the same argument for the COVID. The pros that we can even understand at this point, like fully acknowledging that we fully don't understand it, exceed what we already know about this virus. So you can say it's the same logic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're really at the mercy of the people making that decision. But anyways, so when we look at this situation, we're talking about, again, not just obesity. Zoom out of obesity,
Mm-hmm.
diabetes, autoimmune conditions, PCOS, we're talking about insulin resistance. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about metabolic derangement, metabolic health. So we are starting at a very rapid rate now to understand more and more what a role metabolic health plays in overall health. You look at the biggest killers: cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, and we all acknowledge now, I think most people, that it's insulin resistance is the driving path behind those killers, right? Even cancer has a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Not all. There's obviously a ton more. I'm not an expert in any of those diseases particularly, but I know the driving factor. And so I think when we know how deleterious the path is and how it starts with metabolic derangement, and we have our first class of medication that directly tackles that, it really is getting closer to the root cause, as opposed to diabetes, blood pressure, and cholesterol medications that more focus on symptoms of metabolic derangement. We have something that's actually addressing head on the problem. Now, truthfully, and this is where functional comes into play. I was just talking to the wizard on my last podcast. From a pharmacological perspective, this is the closest to the root. This is the root cause. If you're talking to an allopathic Western medicine, but if you're talking to a functional doctor, no, it's lifestyle. That's the closest to the root cause because that's your day to day, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how do you, where do you go with that? How do you make sense of it? So I think that is the answer. They believe, the scientific community believes, that there's more benefit given all of that at this point than possible negativity. And I would agree with that. I embrace these. My clinic embraced them. It's been several years now. But I was very much like, we got to get off as quickly as possible. Get
Right.
off as like, because it's because in my head at the beginning I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm really, as a functional practitioner, I'm really embracing this. I've never found myself pushing a
Right.
pharmacological agent, but I saw the utility was so big. I was like, okay, let's get on it. But now I would say really over the last 2 years, these things, they're already approved for obesity and diabetes. They're being studied for neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, addiction
Mm-hmm.
issues, chronic kidney disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, autoimmune diseases, GI issues. And there's probably more that I'm not even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
You
And
know,
what autoimmune condition is not assisted by prolonged fasting? It doesn't matter if it's regional pain or GERD or SIBO or Hashimoto's. You fast, you're less inflamed, you're going to feel better.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. There's so much lifestyle that
Mm-hmm.
we can do, but I think I definitely feel confident telling people at this point, from everything that I've seen, the pros absolutely weigh the cons.
Mm-hmm.
There's no free lunch. There is risk with these medications, and so if you can lose your weight, make the changes with just some supplements, do that.
Mm-hmm.
If you can maintain lasting weight loss, get off your ass and put yourself to work and challenge yourself. Because I think some of you haven't even tried. Now, a lot of you have, presumably, And many of you have lost weight many times only to gain it back. So if you're truthfully in that category where you've been there, done that over and over and over, and you only got so many fights, I mean, how many times can you fight a battle hoping to eventually win before you give up and never win, right?
Yeah.
There is a
Yeah.
finite amount. Like, yeah, they say keep trying, but you can only try. Beat me down so many times before I just say that's it,
Okay.
and I
Okay.
succumb. So
Last challenging question. There are those out there right now listening that are confined to wheelchairs, had a laminectomy last week, um, foot removal from diabetes. Not everyone, unfortunately, has the ability to increase their energy expenditure, right? But they're still just as at risk to hitting plateaus. What do you do for the ones where we cannot necessarily get them to get as active as we would like?
yeah, I think the good news is if we're talking about the plateaus, it's not an issue with exercise. So, fixing the plateau is going to be the same thing that we talked about earlier, just isolating that you're in a plateau and doing the reset and slowly increasing your calories. If you're asking what do people do to achieve lasting weight loss when they can't exercise, this is why I think the flow protocol and the
Mm,
fasting comes into play because I think at some point they're going to have to exercise, and I think the reality of getting them there is getting them more and more results, right? There's so many pillars to focus on: the nutritional side of things, the fasting side, the weight training side, the supplements, the inflammation if you have it, the stress, the sleep. I can throw in morning routines, I can throw in bedtime routines. Like that's a lot, you know. You don't need to do them all right out the gates. You just kind of they're pillars, right? You implement one or two, however many you can adhere to at a time, and you build and you build and you build. So exercise is absolutely important. Weight
mm,
training is important. But if you can't do it, you can't do it. Do the best that you can at every given moment. That's all anybody else is asking for. Well, really, I mean, no one's asking you to do it per se, but if you believe in this idea of there's a higher power there and you believe that there's some sort of driving force towards improvement in the world, it starts with you as an individual. And you need to expect more out of yourself if you should and want to expect more out of
mm.
others. Start with yourself. Set an example for yourself before you can expect better from others.
Yeah. I think we're all becoming, and for good reason, more cynical each and every single moment, second, day, week, month. And my biggest frustration since a teenager really has always been having these amazing solutions, having these great answers, but yet having people in front of me who don't jump at it. You had the money, no problem whatsoever, but you didn't get the personal trainer, even though you're 60 pounds overweight, right? You're not taking fish oil, even though you have access to it, and it can change your life based off what I see in your lipid panel. I don't have the energy to take a pill every morning, right? I'll never understand it, especially when people get to know us and who we work with. I think it's pretty damn evident that we really care about. I mean, we'd be in pharmacological sales. That's the truth of it if we didn't care. So knowing that, if you could get one more person today to actually take a chance at this and actually have their life changed, what would you say right now in this moment? To try to convince them to at least pull the trigger at looking into this stuff.
I think it's all mindset at the beginning. It really is. It's mindset before anything else. Because if you're 1 foot in, then you're going to be 1 foot out. So we really got to focus on the mindset before we even start anything else, because that can get an individual fully in, and then being fully in, it's almost even if you do the wrong stuff, you still have a shot. You're stumbling, figuring it out. I always tell people, figure it out as you go. Don't get analysis paralysis. Figure it out as you go. Make mistakes, fall down, get hurt, get up, keep going. But to have the motivation to do that, to dive in, even before you have an executed plan, I'm not saying don't have plans, guys. Like try to get a plan.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong, but you get my point. Don't wait till you have the perfectly executed plan. That's really what I mean. But to do that in this category, I think what matters most is sitting down and really getting honest and straight with yourself. You know, yeah, I have this goal. I want to lose weight. Why? It's usually health, right? It's usually, when you dig into the why, it should get emotional. And then you ask yourself, wow, after you really isolate the why, you get a little emotional with yourself, why you want to lose 100 pounds. What's going to happen in 5 years if you accomplish this? It's like, wow, shit, what's it going to look like? How different is it going to be? Then this gets a little deep, but what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years if you don't do this? And I think for a lot of people, it's kind of scary. I think I'm closed off on that. I don't want to think about dying. I don't want to think about having a heart attack or a stroke, you know, getting cancer, right? This is a tough conversation, but I promise you, if you do this and that answer is anywhere near any of those situations, then you're going to have a moment with yourself where, gosh, if that doesn't get you there, then we need to have a whole other conversation, you know. But I think for most people in a mental capacity of sanity, I think they would use that final piece, and that will be the nail in the coffin to get them now executing and moving and figuring out and not being hesitant. So I think it's all mental first.
That's funny. You say that. I remember Jordan Peterson sometime in the last 6 months talks about the most powerful motivator being as realistically as possible, painting the picture of what happens if you don't take action. And so, not just that I'll die, you know, after a few years, my kids are asking me to go do things and I'm just too tired. I get up in the morning, and by the time I've had my coffee, that flight has already got me exhausted. As a result of that exhaustion, I start getting short with people I care about, and they push away from me, and I become more on a, like, you need to be specific. You need to be like really real with yourself. And once you paint that picture, if you're not lying to yourself, I don't know how that couldn't be a motivator to take action.
100%, 100%. Ignorance is bliss. This is not blissful.
Yeah.
This is tough. You need to get comfortable with being tough. You need to be you need to become comfortable in uncomfortable situations, and that's what this is all about. So, oh man, as always, this was another killer one.
Yeah, man. Thanks.
All right.
If you guys found that informative, then you're not going to want to miss this next video. I'm going to link to it right here, guys. Click that. It's going to be a continued explanation of what you guys learned today. We'll see you later.